My name is Philippe Mariani. I'm the head of international relations in Sofia Antipolis, which is a science and technology park #1 in Europe. And I'm going to moderate this session, which is AI ethics in action, from principles to practice. I would like to present to you today Francesca Rossi, which is in the middle, as you guessed. She's an Italian computer scientist. She's doing research in AI. And at the height of 22-year academic career, Francesca took a leave of absence from her tenured full professorship in computer science at the University of Padua in Italy to explore new ways of thinking. Francesca spent a year at Harvard University's Radcliffe Institute, and then she joined IBM after Radcliffe. She's the president of the International Joint Conference on Artificial Intelligence and is the associate editor-in-chief of the Journal of Artificial Intelligence Research. She's an IBM fellow and the IBM AI Ethics Global Leader. And she works at the T.G. Watson IBM Research Lab in New York. And she states that the ultimate goal is not to improve AI, but to improve us as human beings through the advancement of AI. Am I correct? So we're going to talk about that, huh, Francesca? Giovanni is the head of business strategy and development, Credo AI, one of the global leaders within operationalizing responsible AI across all industries. Up until recently, he was global head of algorithm and AI ethics at IKEA in English, IKEA. And Giovanni is committed to help organizations comply with the EU AI Act and continuing investing in AI with confidence. And Dr. Florian is a faculty associate of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University and the University Research Chair in Technology and Society at the University of Ottawa, where he's an associate professor of law. And he's also the director of the AI Society Initiative, as well as the director of the Center for Law, Technology and Society. He is internationally recognized through a thought leader on technology policy engaged in shaping frameworks that safeguard rights and liberties in the digital context to build a more secure and inclusive society. Right, so now that this has been said, let's kick off. Francesca, let's start with you. Can you present yourself firstly, and maybe a little bit more, and your background, especially as it relates to AI and ethical?
Sure. Okay. Thanks for inviting me to this panel. I think the topic is very important. To go from very high-level principles to actual concrete actions, and that's what I've been doing since I joined IBM, which was 8 years ago. As you said, between my academic career and IBM, there was one sabbatical year that I think it was a pivotal moment for me because the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard is really a crash course in multidisciplinarity. So that's where I spent 1 year together with people that were very different from me, being an AI researcher, a background in AI. So there were people writing poems, people making movies, people looking for planets similar to Earth, and these people were not interested in my detailed research result or theorem or experiment. They were just asking big questions about what I wanted to achieve with my work in AI. And that's where I started thinking about the societal impact of AI. That was 2015.
2015 already?
Yes, right. And then when I joined IBM, so we started immediately our path in starting with high-level principles about AI ethics, but then moving and evolving every moment to much more concrete actions. So that's where my path from being an AI researcher and a professor to being, somebody working also on the ethical aspects of AI started and is still continuing.
Right. Would you like to say a little word on the how you got into the ethical part?
Yeah, so I come from the other side of the conversation, like from the policy side, being like a law professor. But so I've been working on like tech policy issues for quite a few years, and interested in like platform governance and IP and privacy issues related to different kind of technologies. But for like AI ethics and AI policy, I started that work mostly around like 2016, especially when I joined the University of Ottawa, where like we're a powerhouse in tech policy in North America and even like around the globe. And I had colleagues who have been working on this for like 30 years. So way before it was like cool and even maybe called like AI, on robots, ethics, etc., on drones, all of those cool tech, but that also like kind of present some risk for society. So working like privacy issues and how to deploy those technology, working with now innovators and colleagues in computer science and engineering, like developing those tools.
And Giovanni, how did you?
How did I end up here?
Why,
yeah.
First of all, not only how, but why? Yeah.
I think the why is quite easy. We can't see tech in isolation. Tech is an enablement of society around us, and as we are humans living in society, how can we infuse what we think is important outside of technology in our value systems, whatever that value system is, on a societal level, on an organizational level, and how to infuse that. So it seems quite natural that we bring that in, make it a natural part of how we develop and deploy technology as AI. And how I ended up with it is that I've been deep into business operations, developing organizations, analytics, AI, and finally, I got the opportunity to not only talk about good values, but actually practicing it, being able to enable organizations that I've been in, both public sector, IKEA as a global organizations, and others, to see that in able to deliver value with AI, yes, to kind of being able to have the license to operate and not making it break, it's a hygiene factor to just have it in place. Otherwise, we'll come into circumstances, and we'll come into that maybe later on in the conversation, where it doesn't work. And I think here's one of the key things, that it's about maturing the field of technology. First, it starts off with very interesting things that do efficiency and productivity, and we learn.
Sorry, but what do you call maturing the field of technology?
Yeah. So you start off with finding out what you can do. And then it matures to a point of what we should do. Right. And being able to gear it up and steer it towards value set that are important. And I think we're coming to that point, and I'm really happy to be part of kind of steering that conversation, that it's not about either or, ethics or efficient use of AI, but actually seeing how is that a natural part of the process.
Yeah. So, Francesca, how do the companies, large companies, embrace the AI, and how do they implement it strategy-wise?
Okay, so as I said, okay, it's a process, first of all, so it's not something that changes in 5 minutes. And that's something that seems obvious to say, but sometimes is not well understood from people that are outside the company, like from academia, for example. I myself, I was in academia for more than 25 years. It's not easy to understand that within a company, there is a process to change the culture of the people, of the developers, of those that make the directives and define the processes, and to integrate with old processes and so on. So that's the first thing that I learned, coming from academia and going into a company. The second thing is that we started with a discussion group around AI ethics that then evolved into our centralized governance, which is called the AI Ethics Board, that has decentralized governance for the whole company about AI ethics, from defining high-level principles to structuring the framework onto a few pillars, the topics topics that we focus on. And then to all the other activities that the company does, from education material to playbooks for our developers, to technical tools, to risk assessment frameworks, to the partnership that we have with other stakeholders, so the whole thing. And this fact that there is a centralized governance body is very important. First of all, at the beginning, this body was not making decisions, was an advisory body, and then it was transformed because we understood that it didn't have much impact in the company, and now it's a full decision-making body. So if the board says that this deal cannot be signed, the deal cannot be signed. Okay, because of it's not aligned to our thing. So that was the first lesson, that we needed a centralized body and also positioned, meaning the members are positioned at the very high level in the structure of the company, because if you position the governance of AI ethics into the single teams that create the technology, then these teams tend to think in terms of cost savings. So I have to save. I have to be fast. I have to deliver. I have to save money and to make a deal and so on. If you position the governance at a much higher level, then this governance can also think about other returns on the investment of AI ethics, which are not cost savings, but are related to societal impact, to values that the companies can bring to the clients, to the trust of the clients, to brand reputation. So all these things that at the level of the teams are less prioritized. So that was very important, where you position this governance body. And then again, from a tech company point of view, it's natural to think, at least at the beginning, that if there is a problem with AI, so for example, AI is making discrimination, or AI is not respecting privacy correctly, or all the problems that we all know about using AI. So it's natural to think that if there is a problem with AI, we can solve it with some more AI, some more software tools that can find solutions to these problems. And of course, the software tools are very important. So we use regularly tools to detect and mitigate bias in the data or in the algorithms and so on. But those are the easy part. Yeah. The most important part is really to change the culture of these teams, the developers, to make the developers team diverse so they can discover each other biases. So the tools need a change of culture to be used in the right way. And then, of course, this focus on the partnership, working not just internally, but also in collaboration with the other stakeholders, not just other companies, but also civil society organizations, policymakers, to bring what we have learned in our journey in AI ethics, but also to learn from others, to compare the different approaches and see what we're doing. Another thing that we also made an explicit decision on, we don't have an external advisory board. You may remember that some companies tried to do that. That didn't work very well. It lasted less than a week. But we think that our way of interacting with outside the company, the whole ecosystem outside the company, is really through our partnerships. And that's the best way to bring our knowledge and to get knowledge from others. And our AI ethics board is only internal, made of people that represent all the divisions of the companies, from research, from products, from software, consulting, marketing, government relationship, communication, all of them are represented.
But okay, please,
I just had a question to you, Francesca. Very great description and recognize a lot of it. A question to you is that how important did you find it to anchor your direction around ethics towards other directions with the company, towards the company values, the company business model at such a high level? And how was the process of having that engagement from your senior leadership?
Okay, so first of all, I remember when at some point I went to some very senior VP, and I pitched this idea of having an AI ethics board, which was not existing at the time. It was, again, the discussion group. And I was happy to see that there was interest in that. And in fact, we made a study a few years ago on surveys of many, many different companies that showed that in recent years, companies have understood that this governance of AI ethics is not just a question to be resolved in the technical part of the company. So for some time, companies thought, oh, that's the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer responsibility to put together something about AI ethics. But then companies understood that instead it's at the level of the board or at the level of the CEO. So really on also the non-technical part. And this is what I saw at IBM, So I started pitching and saying, oh, we need a board. And then it became, the first version. And then it was supported even more with a lot of resources positioned inside the Chief Privacy and Trust Officer office. And so there were, and now it's amazing because it's a company-wide approach. And this, I think, is also another important ingredient here to make it impactful, because I see some other companies that have an AI ethics team positioned inside one of the divisions. And that team, usually, although very well-intentioned, I see that it struggles to have an impact on the other divisions. So that's why, again, it's important to have something that has very high-level representatives from all the divisions, so that whatever the board decides, then they go home and they implement that, whatever is related to their division. So a company-wide approach where every IBMer, even though not building the technology or not using the technology, can play its role in making sure that the technology that IBM needs. Another thing is the pressure from the clients. Because the clients have said, so we have a business model which is different from other companies that use or build AI, which is a B2B kind of business model. No? So we deliver technology to other companies, like a bank or a financial institution or a government or a hospital or an airport, so other large companies. And these large companies usually live in very regulated environments. And so they also have to respect some behavior of the services they give to their own clients. So they also are pressuring IBM and say, okay, you are delivering me this piece of technology to do something in my operations, but what can you tell me? I mean, just show me the test that it doesn't produce discrimination, or show me that it respects privacy in the right way that I need it. So there is, in our business model, also pressure from the outside, from the clients and the partners that help, the company understand that actually, as you said at the beginning, the focus on AI ethics and spending time, resources on those aspects is not driving in a different direction than profit and business value, but actually is going together in the same direction.
That's interesting. So we understand that governing bodies now within large corporations are integrating ethical aspects. But how do these principles, the ethical principles, where are they sourced? I mean, because if you have different, there's a variability in the human being with his ethical principles, right? So who in a company states that this is ethical and this is not ethical? How do you source that? And how does it trickle down afterwards within the company? We will come, Florian, later a little bit on the regulation side. But before we regulate, where do our ethical principles lay, right? I mean, like I see, we were just previously Armée de Terre here, showing AI technology embedded in weapons, right? So maybe this is fantastic technology, but how ethical is it, and where is the principle of ethics applied to that corporate, which is the army, for instance?
Do you want to start, or should I? I can start. I'll keep it brief. There is no shortages at all of good examples, of reference guidelines, reference principles. Great things have been done both within the UN system, OECD, and many other multinational bodies. So there's no shortage of good examples. It will fail if you just take one off the shelf and bring it into an organization. And I think and the main reason for that is those are meant to act as fuel, as good reference points, and rather actively engage the organization to see where does the existing business principles root in? What are the existing frames of work around ethics, business ethics usually? Yes. Where is the usual code of conduct? And then go through the work of interpreting that with good best practice from the outside. Because anyone that sees ethical principles come to them, really disseminated throughout the organization, they will ask, where is this rooted in who we are as an organization?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think one needs to recognize what is already present and prevalent, because they have been recruited, they've been part of an organization for many years, sometimes decades, and they want to be able to recognize so they can apply it, but also being conscious that we're moving into a new state or era where we need to consider the infusion of algorithms in business processes. And then that entails that we bring in also principles or tool sets and language that we haven't used before, but it needs to go through a process of acknowledging what one has. And that was one of the processes when we designed the digital ethical policy for Inter-Archaea Group, was actually starting in the value set of an organization since 80 years. And then going through a process of seeing, okay, how much could we interpret? How much could we bring forward? And what did we just need to nudge a bit to really being it still modern and relevant? So I think it's kind of starting where you stand and then take inspiration from the outside.
Yeah, I agree. It starts with the values on the companies that were stated even before that AI was in the picture, and then it gets adapted. As Giovanni said, at some point, there was actually from your organization at Harvard, there was a project that collected all the sets of principles and put it in a very nice visual way. And I think it was 2018, there were more than 100 sets of principles around AI ethics written by everybody, governments, companies, multi-stakeholder organization, everybody was writing principles. And there was a lot of commonalities, of course.
Yes.
Like, everybody understood that there was, we had to put emphasis on privacy, on transparency, explainability, fairness, robustness, and so on, besides accuracy, of course. So those are, pillars. But then, of course, there are statements that each company can decide to do and position that they can decide to make. For example,
so how much does that influence those principles?
What do you mean?
Well, when each company integrates
so then
its own
it becomes
visibility.
Part of the values of the company. So, for example, at some point, IBM said a few years ago that we are not going to support, to go to your topic that you were raising, we're not going to support with our technology the applications such as autonomous weapons or mass surveillance or things like that, or something that reduces the freedom of people and so on. So there are specific statements, and once there are these statements by the governance of the company, then yes, you implement the principles considering these statements. So now that we have internally this use case risk assessment, every time there is a use case, so a deal to be signed with a client that raises some AI ethics flag according to our framework, then we talk together with the team, the board together with the team, and we also say, oh, okay, but wait a minute, does it respect our principles? Does it respects the playbooks that we give to our developers? Did you use it? Did you do the right test? But also, does it respect what we said explicitly about some positions that we made, very specific, like the ones that I mentioned? Like facial recognition, for example, or other ones. So specific technology and uses of the technology where we made specific statements besides having a general framework.
Okay. Florian, So Harvard has laid out this framework for.
That's okay.
Harvard has laid out this framework for ethical principles, for instance, and then of course this does trickle down, like you just said, in for some major corporations. But then, okay, what is the ethical part and of the regulation framework with respect to those principles, and how far are we today on this aspect?
Yeah, so there is a lot to unpack on what
Yes.
my two panelists said, and like I agree with you, but like in principle, if it was working like this in all companies around the world, this would be wonderful.
Yeah, but it's not the case, is it?
It's not the case, you know. And there's kind of like a timeline, you know, in the 80s, 90s, people were like, oh, we cannot really regulate because we don't know what it is. We're not sure it's going to actually like be working like this. And
regulation cuts freedom.
Exactly. Let's not stifle innovation.
Right.
This is like the favorite, like, you know, expression of industry. They came back to it, but like for many years. And then it was like, trust us. We know how to do this. We're going to do like self, you know, regulation and assessment and develop principles. And then you had like international organizations, governments, academia developing principles. And as you absolutely noted, like in the beginning of the 21st century, we had like so many principles. Basically, every big company were coming up with their own principle. Every big UN agency, almost every government. At some point, it was just, okay, cool. But what should we follow? And you know, you mentioned the case of IBM, but like IBM is not every company. You know, it's one of the biggest tech company in the world. It's a multinational. They have huge budget, team, and at the forefront of some of the cases, and they seem to have like evolved in the right direction. I would say maybe because of some, you know, crisis around the world and like some issues and some flag that was raised either by whistleblowers or like clients or users. But yeah, so it's like a long process. And I think what you highlighted is super important, that, you know, ethics is contextual. You know, the value system of each country, of each company is very different, but that's something to take into account. You know, the value system of IBM is not the same than IKEA. So first, because from where those companies are, you know, the leadership it's super important. And that's also super important to note that, you know, all those principles we've talked about mostly like were issued from the north. And so I work
from
with
the north, you mean?
From like Europe, North America,
right.
Not like Africa, really like Asia or LATAM. Right. And I work with a lot of colleagues in those countries. I know when you think of those systems developed according to like ethical principle, according to like France, you know, even just the notion of freedom of expression is not the same within the different European countries. But if you look at North America, so that's something to take into account when you're a company, but also for a startup. You know, that's something to remember, because they don't have those big panels. They sometimes don't have the documentation, etc. And we had a lot of issues and a lot of crises related to automated system and then like semi-autonomous or like autonomous system, what we call usually like AI. And that's why after like several crisis, regulators came forward. First regarding data and, you know, issue regarding data governance. So for like in Europe we had like GDPR, and like in California CPPA, and like all over the world there is kind of
I'm going to take you on this, because on the regulator side, and you're speaking about the Nordic aspect, geographical, worldwide aspect. So how far is there consensus on the regulatory framework for this? It doesn't seem as though there is yet. We're not there yet.
No, people like to think and often say that, you know, GDPR kind of became like the gold standard, at least for like data protection and like the processing of data protection. It's kind of true in principle, because, you know, people want to do business with the EU, so they kind of all raise their standards. And with super important, you know, logic for the DPO, and you mentioned this for AI, to have like the person in charge of controlling at the top of the organization, not like lost, you know, within a sub-team or like the market people, like the marketing people could like shut them down. So all those kind of principles, they kind of spreading around the world. But also there is another side of GDPR, and that may be something also that's going to happen with AI Act. We may want to discuss this. It's mostly like a compliance framework. And when you talk to people, either within like the big companies or within the startup, most of them is having forms, with boxes to check, and not really having like the conversation that I knew that Francisca was mentioning. When you develop like AI system, any kind of technology today, you need to make sure it's not just like a few, a gang of developers. Often we're like, white cis male developing a software, but like people talking with users, with like marketplace developers, with social scientists, with ethicists, having conversation from the get-go, as it seems to be the case at IBM, and not like, at the end when we need to put this on the market, because this is where you have like an issue. And when you're like a startup, it's super important to take that into account, because you're kind of the client. You just procure, systems, tools, and need to have that information. And that's kind of also what the AI Act that may one day arrive, but like it's finally voted, so it just needs to go through Parliament. Also come to play, like providing documentation obligation and like liability framework to make sure that they have those kind of safeguards.
So would somebody would like to say something on the AI Act, right? Which is right now, in fact, in this moment, and how far is this going? Is it sufficient? Not so sufficient. And how is the industry going to react to this?
So first of all, I think that it was, of course, one cannot expect the same legislation approach in all the world, because there are different approaches. Even between Europe and the US, it's a completely different approach. So, but the example is the GDPR. The US does not have a federal privacy law. Exactly. It has some in some states, but So the European AI Act that was first drafted in, I think, April 2021. So it's has gone through earthquake in some sense, because while there was this long discussion that then led to the trilogue, discussion between the Parliament, the European Commission, and the Council of Europe, and then the approval, the first approval, and now soon also the approval possibly by the Parliament. During those 2 years, basically and a half, the generative AI came into place. So the initial version of the European AI Act, which was not talking about
generative AI,
which was now in the Act is called the General Purpose AI, was all it was a very clean approach that was based on product like regulation, which basically was focused on the uses of AI, so the so-called AI systems. So AI that has a purpose, so it means that you know what is going to be used for, and to give 4 levels of risks to these use cases and uses domains. Some of them are unacceptable risk, so they're not going to be allowed in Europe. Some of them are high risk, a lot of obligations, and in particular, the AI that you want to be seen used in those high risk situations is called trustworthy AI. And it has 7 requirements that were defined by a high level expert group on AI that I was part of, that was the European Commission put in place 2 years before defining the Act, from 2018 to 2020. And then it has some low-level risk that has some transparency obligation and so on. So that was a very clean approach. When generative AI came into place and was included now, it is included now in the Act, then there was a little bit of shift from saying that the risk is in general associated to the use, but for some systems that are very powerful in the future, it will be associated with the technology per se. So it's called the so-called systemic risk. So no matter how you use the technology, it is believed to be risky. And that, to me, is less of an clean approach because it gives a lot of uncertainty to companies that want to deploy that technology, I think. It also is not clear yet how you could define something that has systemic risk, because in the European AI Act, and that there is a link between Europe and the US there, because there is a number of flops, so a number of operations that you need to pass the threshold, and it's the same in the Biden executive order and in the European AI Act, and that says, oh, if you have a system that needs to pass that threshold as computation power, then we say that it has systemic risk. But in my view, that's not a good definition, because even current systems, they can be used, they can be dangerous in some respect. And maybe more powerful systems, maybe there will be much less dangerous because of the techniques that will be used that will make it safer, in the future, which that's my, so I'm saying that overall, I think, we support regulation. We support the European AI Act, although from my personal view, it has been hybridized and it has a less clean approach. But I understand that there was the need to include generative AI in that regulation.
That's a very interesting point. So it seems to me as though the regulators are always coming in a little bit late, right, on the reaction side, like you just said, for the generative AI and so on.
But that's, in fact, the fact that that law, in some part, refers to the specific technology, it's also worrying for that point of view, because it doesn't make the law future-proof. If you tie the law to a technology, the technology, we have seen already in the past 2 years what happened. Yeah. So in the future 2 years, which, by the way, is the time that it will take to actually apply, make the law in effect.
We'll be somewhere else already.
It will be completely different technology. So tying too much the law to a technology seems like not making it future-proof.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, and that's one of the big pitfall, I think, of like the new version. There's been, as you say, like so many versions of the AI Act, and after the trilogue, it was almost yet, a new framework. When you're like, usually when the kind of practice globally on regulating, any kind of new technology was to focus on the use cases, like what the system will do, what the platform will do, like when you look at data protection, this is the same. And like with the AI Act, we had that shift that you mentioned, where like we started to focus on specific technology. There is so much debate on how even those technology, are being defined in the AI Act, and at some point there's been so many, scandal or like worry from the citizen, from the electorate. I feel like the government, wanted to make sure to have this in the act to show that we're acting to protect you. This is the big the AI Act is to open the market and regulate, the internal market in the EU, not to protect citizen and human rights, but in the discourses, this is like what policymakers are conveying to the public, and so you're having this issue. Or if you're like too specific, will it work? By the time I say like applying it, such a complex framework. When you read some sentences, you just, even as law professors, you barely understand exactly what they meant, and you're gonna think that all the state members are going to have to like interpret and like develop their own tools. And then you have this infamous new regulator, with quotes, the AI office, that is from the first communication we have from the European Commission, will not be like a full-fledged regulator, but more like kind of an office that will have a delegated power and will not consolidate all of the different offices working on AI within the European Commission. So for the startup, and you were mentioning the uncertainty that is very bad for innovation, it's not great, because you may have 10 different approaches about the implementation of the AI Act from the European Commission. So that's kind of an issue here.
Giovanni, Giovanni, I have a question for you right now.
Yeah.
It's a tough one because, seen on my side, ethical. If we come back to the ethical principles, ethical principles, it seems to be, even considering different cultures, a consensus on what good and bad is, and the effects of ethics on society and societal change. So the regulatory body, how does the regulatory body implement these, because these ethical, this is not technology, this is ethical principles, right? So those don't change in time. They've been living, or they can change culturally over time, but many years, sometimes centuries. So Giovanni, would you like to give a little take on this?
Yeah, more than happy, and thanks for the good comments from my co-panelists. I think the regulation is complex. It is not perfect. I think we need to recognize that this is the first time across the world that that a region, not only a country or a state, but a region is trying to legislate something that is constantly moving. With that, it will be imperfect. Having that said, I think I maybe have a slightly different take, and I want to pinpoint on that the EU AI Act cannot be seen in its isolation. It's a part of a bigger movement of safeguarding a European values in a digital society.
Right.
So it isn't a part of a bigger context, a contextual context. It's right. European values that one has been trying to promote through the embedment of GDPR, EU AI Act, Data Act, DSA, DMA, like Data Governance Act. You have all of these movements going forward because one wants to nudge society towards the right direction. And the regulation cannot be seen only out of a perspective of compliance, but rather, what is the spirit of this? The spirit of it is to see how can one instill a sentiment that we should use technology with good intent, with good output.
I think that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think the core part here is that the regulation will only take it to a certain step.
Right.
Standards will take it one step further. Best practices will take it another step. And I think we need to, it will take years until we've seen really good practices encompassing all those layers. But what we need to see it is that this is not about what is minimally required, but rather say like, okay, if we see this as the direction, what does good look like? How can we have a spiral to the top rather than trying to minimize towards the bottom as a compliance function?
Yeah, absolutely. Florian, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I would say like, so first to answer your comment, ethics and like values, they evolve, over time. Now we're talking about like bias and discrimination, even what we consider to be like a bias or like a discriminatory practice changes within the different countries, within the EU change over time, just if you look at the past kind of like 20 years. And if you compare like Europe to North America or like Africa, it's very different. So that's something to take into account. But as you noted, the AI Act is put in place like a framework to to make sure that like all AI systems within the EU market follow like EU-based principles. And the EU
embed these values.
Yeah, exactly. And also in the way we apply them, we implement them, etc. So that, as you mentioned, there could be like a toolkit. And for sure, the AI Act is not an end in itself. There might be, like a modification. Actually, the core, I would say that the core of the Act is actually an appendix that might be, like amended by the European Commission. But also, I would like to highlight that, the AI Act come to provide specific, obligation and assessment obligation and frameworks for like documentation and for some like system, but we had AI regulation way before the AI Act. It's not because we might finally have an AI Act that now like, industry need to follow some regulatory framework. They had like just in the EU with product liability, with data protection, contract law, torts or like civil liability in civil law, consumer protection, all of those like different framework, also heavily regulated at the EU level, come into play in regulating AI. So it's just yet another piece to try to bring more transparency and so maybe more trust in the ecosystem and reassure consumers, with certifications.
I would like to make 2 points. One is that with all its imperfection, of course, even the discussion, not even the approval around the European AI Act really went much farther than the borders of Europe, because it inspired also discussions in the US for sure, and in other places as well. So even discussing, what's the right approach, or what is written in the draft, and so on, that really had an impact much beyond Europe. And another thing is that we have to recognize that really it's very challenging to write a law related to AI. Again, one thing is because AI is evolving very rapidly, and the law does not evolve so rapidly. But the other thing is that with generative AI and foundation models, the value chain of AI from the collection of the data for the foundation models to the final solution is much longer. It has many more actors involved. And so it's very difficult to understand who is responsible, who should have the obligations to make sure that the overall path can be trusted and can be applied safely and so on. So it's much more difficult than it was earlier on, where there was a provider of the AI system and the user of the AI system, period. Okay. Yeah. Now it's a whole chain of different actors that provide different things, one to the next one, until you get to the final solution. Yeah. So that's why in the European AI Act, there are these disclosure and transparency obligations from the upstream steps to the downstream steps that then are subjected to the obligations of the high risk if it's used in a high risk use case.
Right, so thank you, Francesca, for this aspect. Time is running really quickly. Would the audience like to ask a few questions to our experts on this? Yeah, here. I'll bring you the mic.
Great, thank you very much. It's been a really interesting panel session, and thank you. Francesca, I'd like to ask a question about the ethics board. If you could just tell us what are the main challenges during the operation of the board? What are the main discussion points? What are the main tensions that are in the board?
Okay, well, some of the challenges, of course, is to, over time, was to help everybody, especially the developers, to implement the new processes that the board was defining. We defined the process like AI ethics by design, which was supposed to be at the beginning, to be integrated in every step of the generation of an AI solution. And at the beginning, it was not really adopted 100% and not even 50% in the company. And then we understood why was that, because these developers were used to some existing processes like privacy by design, security by design, and these were, they were used to those processes when they were doing their everyday job. But we were asking them to add another one on top of what they were doing. They were like, oh, now you add AI ethics by design. And they didn't do it because it was not well integrated with the existing processes. So what we had to do, it was also to have this integrated process where privacy, security, and AI ethics with all our directives was fully integrated. And without that integration, really we were struggling in having all the teams to actually implement what the board was telling them to do.
Yeah.
That's one challenge.
Yeah, and maybe I was quite surprised that you mentioned that you prefer to do it like internally, that, maybe if you could unpack why it's better to have an internal board than an external one, because from my perspective, that would bring more independence. And, because also looking at some cases we had in other big tech corporations, especially in the US, where we've seen that even though they had some safeguards and in place and principles, etc., they end up having the product managers and the product the person like in charge of deciding on the product side, basically hacking those kind of pipeline in favor of like, ads revenue or like clickbait, etc. Like I'm thinking of Instagram, and we need to have like some employees, coming forward and stuff. So I think it's also something to keep in mind for any organization implementing AI, especially big structure, to have like internal processes in place where like if someone sees something that might bring a liability to the company, be able to like raise the bell to those kind of like central board or like GPO and stuff.
So there is the board, but the board is not the only place where this discussion and decisions are being made. The board is supported by so-called focal points that are distributed on all the divisions of the company, and they are the link between the board and that division. So when the board makes a decision that may be relevant to that division, that focal point has to disseminate this decision, do the education relevant to the division, and help them understand what they need to do to implement that decision. And in the other direction also, it brings up feedback, challenges, even notification of something that should be discussed. And the focal point are also the people that the team should be go first to say, we are signing this deal. We are in the process of creating something for a client, and the focal point is the first one to recognize if there is something that raises a flag in terms of AI ethics, and to discuss with the team, and possibly to raise it at the level of the discussion with the board. Okay. So that structure is not just something that stays there and doesn't know what's going on in the division, but there is a link to actually what the teams are doing and the way to bring up raised flag.
And Francesca, yeah, 1 second. I just want to ask, because the time is running out. I mean, we can stay all afternoon. I'd love it. This topic is really important. I just want to ask the audience if there's one more last question. Yeah? Because I think it's important to have your perspective as well.
Thank you. I'm Glenda from Heineken. Again, my question is going to be to you, Francesca, because you mentioned sometimes we are trying to solve AI problems with more AI instead of creating a bit of a change management with developers so they can actually use those principles. But I wanted to ask a bit how extensive or how broader extent we need to include a business, maybe SMEs or project managers or, I don't know, more people from company to have that AI literacy or AI ethics literacy to run these...
What? Sorry? To have
AI literacy or AI ethics literacy in the company, not with only developers, but more with business. I'm asking because we are mostly creating like internal solutions, not like external solutions for other companies, but still they have external consequences. If we are using it for HR solutions, let's say, or we are using consumer data, how much business should know about AI ethics in that sense?
Well, we have internal educational modules for every IBMer, much more detailed for developers, of course, but really, for example, in our business conduct guidelines, that is a course that we have to take every year, mandatory for everybody, there is a part now on various aspects of AI ethics, but that's a very lightweight part. But then there are more detailed, as well as internal, but also external. We work with Coursera to create a course on AI ethics. But I have to say that here we mentioned regulators, we mentioned companies, that they both have to play their complementary part, but we have to mention the education system, the universities that have to help the new generation, those that will become developers, AI experts, to learn AI with AI ethics, not at the end and if there is time and within parentheses kind of thing, but at the beginning as an integral part of studying AI, to really understand that AI is not anymore just a science and the technology, but is a socio-technical scientific discipline, and this has to be reflected in educating the next generation to AI. So it's not AI ethics separate from AI. AI includes AI ethics.
Thank you, Francesca. Giovanni,
Yeah, and I'll keep it short, very brief, to tie also to something that has been mentioned before about it's not about single teams. it's not about only technology. It's not only about those that are within the tech teams or even only the executives. One can see the positive impact of ethics and AI ethics when the business owners, the people responsible for procurement, those that are within the risk management part of the business, are actively engaging with taking relevant decisions and reacting when there is an issue. And I think one needs to be able to see that all things will have some part of a technology touch point going forward. We will have AI infused. We just need to come to the point where we have enough awareness to be able to at least react and then seek advice, because this will permeate across organizations.
Personally, I fully agree with that aspect. Florent, you want to do your last word, and we're going to have to conclude, unless somebody has an extremely important question, which we will accept, of course. No, okay, Florent, please.
Yeah, no, maybe I fully agree with what you both said, and I think we need to change the educational system and the curriculum, for engineers and developers. But we also need to make sure that people in social sciences, in government, understand tech. It's not just engineers and developers. We need to embed the mere notion that they're not just developing technology, and that technology is not neutral. They're socio-technical systems. So to understand that every line of code can have consequences. So, and as you said, it's not 30 minutes or 1 hour of let's talk about ethics. It needs to be, embedded in the whole curriculum.
A more cultural aspect.
No, exactly. But it's, it's not just the student. It's also the professors. When, solving AI with AI, when I talk with some university professors in computer sciences, they're like, oh, but all of this, I can solve it with my lines of code. I'm like, yeah, sure, because you're so good, but maybe others cannot do it. But on the other hand, we need to make sure that society, especially citizens, are aware of what AI can do and cannot do, because there is a lot of magic and marketing around it. But when we look at some of the risk of Gen AI, especially with for democracy, with upcoming election in 2024, we need to bring that literacy, within the citizenry, within the public. They don't need to all become developers, but to understand what's coming. And as you say, also people in procurements, to know that you don't just buy an AI system because it looks cool and you're going to be able to add on your website that you use AI. You need to follow processes and guidelines, and making sure that they have been developed for the needs of your corporation. You need to then train the people within the corporation. You need to make sure that it answers the need of the users, especially in the banking system, as you mentioned, or in healthcare. A tool developed in the US might not and probably will not work in France, because population is different, environment is different. So you need to, train all of the actors to develop new skills. It's really a team effort. It's not just developers.
Right, so we arrive at the end of this panel, and I think, but it's so interesting because I would like to stay longer, but everybody is hungry, so we're going to have to stop here. But we haven't spoken too much on the dark side of the ethics and that. But I think this can lead maybe to next year's panel, where I think it's very interesting also to see that we try to work, including in Sophia Antipolis, on technology for humanity and for the common good, and technology integrated with values, integrity, and ethics. But it's not the case for everybody and for every industry. So these issues, this is why I think these issues are need regulatory bodies, but also need, like you said, to be embedded within cultures, and which takes a long time, and the technology itself is going quicker than the integration through cultural, including, the States, like you just said, and Europe and Africa. And so I think this is very challenging moments that we are living right now. But we hope that this panel contributed a little bit to make everyone think on these issues, and to see how they're being tackled right now in the industry and also in the government and the various governments bodies. So we would like to thank you for your attention, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks very much.